The sky was the colour of wet concrete that morning, and the wind carried the kind of chill that slid down into your bones before the sun even had a chance to rise. Caleb Ross sat in the driver's seat of his car, hands wrapped around a coffee cup he could barely afford. The heater wheezed, blowing lukewarm air across the cracked windshield, but it was better than nothing. He had dropped Lily off at school just a few minutes earlier. She had smiled at him through the back window, her cheeks still pink from the cold. That smile, it had a way of staying with him. Caleb leaned back, staring at the clouds. He was earlier than usual. He had a job interview in the next town over, a small auto parts store. Not ideal, but steady hours, maybe health insurance. He had already circled it on the fridge calendar in faint blue ink, just in case Lily asked what the day held. He didn't tell her it was his 4th interview that month, or that the last 3 hadn't even called back. The road ahead curved into the hills, cutting through patches of woods where the trees bowed slightly from last week's storm. As he eased the car forward, rain began to tap lightly against the roof. First a few drops, then more, until the world outside blurred into moving grey. He didn't notice the car at first. It wasn't until he rounded a bend that he saw it, a silver vehicle. Not quite off the road, but angled wrong, like it had slipped from the edge. One side of it was dipped deep into the muddy grass, and the other was barely holding on. The hazard lights blinked slowly, and through the fogged window he could make out a woman behind the wheel. Caleb slowed. He glanced at the line of cars ahead. No one had stopped. Most just swerved past, tyres hissing in the rain. Some slowed down to look. A few even had their phones out, maybe recording, but no one pulled over. He flicked his blinker and eased his old car onto the shoulder. Stepping out, the cold hit him hard. Rain soaked through his jacket within seconds, but he didn't care. He walked quickly, boots squelching in the mud, and as he got closer to the silver car, he saw the woman inside struggling with her seatbelt, panic on her face. "Ma'am?" he called out, raising his voice over the sound of rain. She looked up sharply. "Are you okay?" he asked. I can't get it out of reverse," she said, her voice shaky. "I tried to pull over, but the wheels just kept slipping. I thought I could stop." "It's all right," Caleb said, carefully approaching the driver's side. "Do you think you can open the door?" She looked hesitant, glancing at the slope below them, as if the whole car might tip. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "You're going to be fine, just trust me." Her hands moved slowly and the lock clicked open. Caleb reached for the handle and eased the door open just enough to offer his hand. "Come on," he said, calm and steady. "We'll take it one step at a time." She took his hand. Her grip was cold and uncertain, but she moved. Slowly, carefully, she shifted toward him, her boots landing in the wet grass. Caleb kept his other hand on the doorframe to steady them both. One misstep and they'd both be in the ditch. When she finally reached solid ground, she exhaled hard and clutched her coat tighter around her shoulders. She didn't let go of his hand right away. "Thank you," she said, almost in a whisper. "I didn't know what to do." "You're safe," Caleb replied. "That's what matters." She looked at him, really looked at him, like she was trying to read a story written on his face. And maybe there was one, the kind you don't tell unless someone asks the right way. "I'm Julia," she said, brushing damp hair from her eyes. "Julia Langston." He nodded, brushing rain from his brow. Caleb Ross." They stood there for a second longer, 2 strangers beside a wet, crooked car in the middle of nowhere, just long enough for something to shift, not in the road, but in the space between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment wasn't just about a near accident. It was the beginning of everything that would come next. Julia didn't say much as Caleb walked her back to his car. The silver one she had been driving was clearly not going anywhere. One wheel was still buried in mud, and the rain had only made things worse. She glanced over her shoulder once, watching it blink quietly in the ditch like a reminder of how fast control can slip away. Caleb opened the passenger door for her. "It's not fancy," he said almost apologetically, "but the seat's warm." She managed a soft smile and climbed in, brushing water off her coat as she settled. He got in beside her and started the engine. The heater rumbled on, pushing out uneven warmth that filled the quiet space between them. They sat for a moment, just breathing. Julia broke the silence first. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." "You'd have figured it out," Caleb replied, eyes on the road ahead. "People are tougher than they think." She looked at him sideways. "You don't know me." He smiled faintly. "No, but I've met panic before. You didn't freeze, that counts." Julia studied him more closely now. His jacket was worn, sleeves fraying near the cuffs. His jeans were faded, knees damp with mud. And yet there was something calm about him, like he was used to storms, both the weather kind and the life kind. "What about you?" she asked. "Where were you headed?" He shrugged. "Interview, auto parts store, couple towns over." "Were you late?" "Yeah," he said simply, "but it's all right." She tilted her head. "You don't sound too worried." "I've had practice," he said. "You stop getting your hopes too high when rent's due and the car makes noises you can't afford to check." She didn't answer right away, but something softened in her expression. It wasn't pity, it was something closer to recognition. They pulled into a small gas station up the road. A payphone stood near the ice machine, faded and half forgotten. Julia reached for the door handle. "I'll be quick," she said. "You don't have to wait." "I've got time," he replied. She hesitated, then nodded and stepped out into the light rain. Caleb watched her walk, her boots leaving faint prints on the wet pavement. He didn't know who she was beyond her first name, but something about the way she carried herself, even shaken, told him she wasn't just anyone. While she made the call, Caleb glanced at the glove box. Lily's drawing was still there, the little sun above their heads smiling bigger than either of them could some days. He ran a hand through his wet hair and let out a breath. He hadn't saved the woman because he wanted anything. It wasn't about that. It just felt like the right thing to do. And these days, right things didn't come with receipts or rewards, they just were. Julia returned a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee, steam curling up from the lids. "This one's yours," she said, offering it to him through the open window. "Black, no sugar. Took a guess." "You guessed right," he said, accepting it. "My assistant's on her way," she added. "She'll pick me up here." "Good," he nodded. "Glad you're all right." She looked like she'd wanted to say more, then didn't. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad. She scribbled something, tore the page, and handed it to him. "My number," she said, "just in case." "In case of what?" he asked, more curious than sceptical. "In case you ever need something, or in case I never get to say thank you properly." He stared at the paper, unsure what to say. Julia stepped back, rein soft against her shoulders. "You saved a stranger today, Caleb. That says something about who you are." Then she turned and walked toward the black car that had just pulled into the lot. She didn't look back, and Caleb didn't expect her to. But he folded the note carefully, slipped it into his wallet, and for reasons he couldn't explain, didn't throw away the cup she gave him. He drove off 10 minutes later, not toward the interview, it was too late for that, but toward home, where the apartment was cold and the fridge was half empty, but Lily would be waiting with a deck of cards and stories from school. He didn't know it yet, but Julia Langston wasn't done with him. In fact, she had already made her next call, and that call was about a man named Caleb Ross. Julia Langston didn't usually think about strangers after the fact. Her job was filled with people, applicants, volunteers, vendors, community partners, and by the end of the week, faces blurred, conversations overlapped. There was always something next, someone waiting. But Caleb Ross, he stayed with her. Long after the silver car was pulled from the ditch, long after the rain stopped. That night, back at her townhouse, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he stood in the cold without flinching, the steady way he spoke, the quiet way he left without asking for anything. She sipped tea with the TV on low, laptop open in front of her, pretending to catch up on work. But her eyes kept drifting to the edge of the screen, to the notepad still sitting on her kitchen counter, the same one she'd torn the page from to give him her number. She never did that. Not in her position. Not with people she just met. But something had pulled at her, not out of charity, but recognition. She knew what tired looked like, what survival felt like. She had grown up with it. Her mum used to scrub houses until her knees gave out. Her dad cleaned floors at a middle school for 30 years. They had done their best. Raised her on honesty and leftovers, hand-me-downs and grit. Julia had earned scholarships, skipped parties, worked 3 campus jobs, and built her way up from temp assistant to executive director. People saw the polished version now, tailored blazer, clean car, staff behind her, but they didn't see the rest. She hadn't forgotten. And maybe that's why she opened a blank browser tab that night and typed in Caleb Ross, Ohio. She didn't expect much, but there were a few results, most useless. A decade-old high school football roster, a car forum post from someone with the same name asking how to replace a belt on a Honda. Then she found a local mechanics site from a now-closed shop. There was a page that hadn't been updated in years, a team photo with names under it. And there he was, younger, less tired around the eyes, but the same steady gaze. Caleb Ross, lead technician. She kept digging. A utility listing with an address in a neighbourhood she recognised. Not the best part of town, but not the worst either. Mostly old apartments and row houses. She looked it up on Street View. The building was weathered, paint peeling from the siding. A few window units stuck out awkwardly, and one of the stair rails was bent at an angle that made her flinch. Julia leaned back in her chair. She wasn't sure what she was doing, or what she planned to do. But the more she stared at that building, the more something in her chest tightened. This man had pulled her from a car like it was nothing, then walked away like it meant even less. And he had a daughter. She remembered the drawing on his dashboard, the little son, the two stick figures. Lily. She didn't want to overstep, didn't want to assume. But something told her, in that quiet, undeniable way, that maybe Caleb needed someone to step in the same way she had once needed it. The next morning she stood in the mirror longer than usual. No blazer, no heels. She pulled on jeans, sneakers, a soft hoodie, hair in a low bun. No makeup except chapstick. She looked regular, the version of herself she hadn't seen in years. It felt right. She grabbed her keys, her phone, and a small paper bag from the counter. She wasn't sure what she'd say when she saw him. She just knew she had to. The neighbourhood was quieter than she expected. Julia parked a few houses down and stepped out slowly, careful not to spill the coffee she had balanced on top of the paper bag. It was still early, the kind of morning where the sky looked like it hadn't made up its mind yet. Some windows along the block were open, and laundry flapped faintly in the wind. Caleb's building looked just like the image she had found online. Older, but not falling apart, just tired. Like someone doing their best on little sleep. She climbed the stairs one at a time. The railing wobbled under her hand. Outside apartment 2B, she paused. She could hear faint movement inside, something shifting, maybe a TV playing softly. For a second, she almost turned around. This wasn't her place, right? He hadn't called. He hadn't asked. What was she even doing here? But then she remembered the way he looked that day. Soaked, steady, kind. And how his first thought was to help, not hesitate. So she knocked. There was a pause. Then the door creaked open a few inches and Caleb stood there, half surprised, half exhausted. He wore a t-shirt that had seen better days and held a dish towel in one hand. His eyes blinked like the light was too bright. "Hey," Julia said softly, holding up the coffee. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything." He stared at her for a second longer before stepping back. "No, just finishing up breakfast. Come in." She stepped inside slowly, taking in the room. It was small, but clean. A few drawings were taped to the wall. The couch looked second-hand, the table a bit wobbly. But it felt lived in, real, warm. Lily peeked out from the hallway, her hair in two small braids, a purple blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. Caleb glanced at her. "That's Lily. Lily, this is Miss Julia." Julia knelt slightly, smiling. "Hi there." Lily looked at her father, then back at Julia. "You're the car lady?" Caleb let out a short laugh. "Kind of, yeah." Julia chuckled. "That's fair." Lily stepped closer, inspecting the paper bag. "Is that muffins?" "It might be," Julia said playfully. "Blueberry, still warm." Caleb looked at her, eyebrows raised. "You really didn't have to—" "I know," she said, cutting him off gently. "But I wanted to." They sat at the table while Lily opened the bag, her face lighting up. Caleb poured water into two mismatched mugs and slid one across to Julia. "So," he said carefully, "what brings you here?" She met his gaze. "You," she said plainly. He leaned back slightly, unsure how to respond. Julia took a breath. "I looked you up. I know that's probably weird, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. About how you just stepped in like that. About how most people would have kept driving." Caleb shifted in his chair. "It wasn't anything big." "It was," she said. "To me it was." He nodded, eyes dropping to his hands. "You really didn't have to come all the way out here." "I know," she said again. "But I wanted to. Because I think you're the kind of person who doesn't get noticed enough. Who helps and then walks away. And maybe I've got some resources that could help you back, even just a little." He tensed slightly. "I don't need charity." "This isn't charity," Julia said, voice steady. "It's opportunity. That's different." He looked at her again, more curious than defensive now. "I work with people looking for a second shot," she said. "People with skills, work ethic, drive, people like you. I run a training program downtown, digital operations, we teach logistics, systems, workflow management, and I think you'd be good at it." He stared at her for a long second. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." He let out a breath, slow and quiet. "I haven't sat in a classroom since high school." "You ever rebuilt a carburetor?" she asked. He nodded. "Plenty." "Then you've got what it takes." They sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was Lily humming softly as she munched on a muffin. Caleb finally spoke. "I'd need to figure out childcare, and I don't have much in the way of anything right now." "I'll help," Julia said, "however I can." Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper. "Why?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Because someone once gave me a shot when I had nothing but a pair of cheap shoes and a student ID. And because sometimes you don't need a reason to do the right thing." He didn't speak again, but when he nodded, just once, quiet and slow, Julia knew what it meant. It meant yes, and sometimes that's all it takes to start over. Caleb didn't sleep much that night. He said yes, but the minute Julia left, doubt started crowding in. What if he couldn't keep up? What if he made a fool of himself? What if this was another door that would close just when it started to matter? He didn't tell Lily all the details, just that Daddy was going to try something new. She had looked up from her colouring and nodded like it was no big deal. "You always figure stuff out," she said. "You're good at that." He wanted to believe her. The next morning, he stood in front of the Lane Tech Community Centre, the same organisation Julia helped run, wearing a shirt he hadn't touched in over a year. He had ironed it the night before using a towel and a pot of hot water. No one taught him how to do that. Life did. The building was modern but welcoming. Big glass windows, simple signs, soft lighting. Inside, a receptionist smiled and pointed him toward room B. He followed the hallway slowly, trying not to look like someone who didn't belong. When he stepped inside, a handful of people were already seated at folding tables, a mix of ages. Some young and wide-eyed, others older, quieter. A woman with silver hair was flipping through a binder. A man in a delivery uniform scrolled his phone. Everyone looked like they had somewhere else to be, but chose this instead. Julia wasn't there yet, but a coordinator named Ben welcomed him with a nod. "You must be Caleb," he said. "Julia told me about you. Take any seat, we'll get started in a few." Caleb sat near the back. There were no grades here, no tests on the board, just modules, job leads, and coffee in a styrofoam cup. The first session was mostly introductions. Who you were, what brought you there, what you hoped to learn. When it was his turn, Caleb hesitated. "I'm Caleb Ross," he said finally. "I used to be a mechanic, lost the job when the shop shut down, been figuring things out since." He stopped there. No long speech, no over-explaining, just the truth. A few people nodded. One woman murmured, "Same here." After class, Ben handed him a starter packet with login info, a used tablet, and a bus pass, good for the rest of the month. "We try to make it easy to show up," he said. "Showing up's the hardest part." Caleb walked home that evening, not because he had to, but because the air felt clearer than it had in a long time. His boots were still soaked from the morning rain, and his jacket zipper was broken. But for the first time in months, the weight on his chest felt a little lighter. When he walked through the door, Lily was sitting on the couch with her feet curled under her, watching cartoons with the volume low. She looked up. "Did it go okay?" Caleb dropped his bag and smiled. "Yeah, kiddo, it actually did." She beamed, then held up a piece of paper. "I made you something." It was a drawing of him standing beside a building labelled Tech School in crooked letters. He was holding a book, and she had drawn a big star above his head. "You're the smartest daddy ever," she said proudly. Caleb knelt down beside her and pulled her into a hug. He didn't say anything, because sometimes there are no words for the way hope feels when it's been gone too long, and finally decides to come back. 3 weeks in, and Caleb was starting to feel like less of an outsider. He showed up early every morning, even when the buses ran late or the rain came down sideways. He sat at the front now, asked questions, helped the woman next to him figure out how to reset her password without needing to ask twice. The work wasn't easy, but it wasn't foreign either. Everything reminded him of the shop, the logic of systems, the importance of timing, The patience it took to fix something instead of tossing it out. He just wasn't using wrenches anymore. He was using workflow charts, schedules, and checklists. Julia stopped by the centre once a week. Not to hover, just to check in. She'd bring donuts sometimes, stay for 15 minutes, and quietly watch how people were doing. She never singled Caleb out. But once, as she was leaving, she passed behind him and whispered, "Told you you'd be good at this." He didn't say anything back, just gave a small smile and kept working. At home, Lily noticed the shift too. There were more groceries in the fridge. The heater was working again. Well, most of the time. And every evening, Caleb would sit with her at the table while she did her homework, sometimes still wearing his lanyard from class, the one that made her say, "You look official now." He was tired, but it was the good kind of tired. And then, just like that, the ground shifted. It started with a cough. At first, he didn't think much of it. Lily always had a little congestion when the weather changed, but this time it lingered, turned deeper. She started waking up in the middle of the night, coughing until her face flushed. One night she even threw up from it. Caleb took her to the clinic the next morning, holding her hand as they waited under the humming lights. The doctor listened carefully, ran a few tests, and then gave a quiet diagnosis. Her asthma had flared again, worse than before. The cold apartment, the dust, the stress, it had all piled up. "You'll need to get her back on daily medication," the doctor said, flipping through her chart. "And a new inhaler. The one on record expired months ago." Caleb nodded, jaw tight. "How much are we talking?" The doctor gave him a number that hit harder than anything. He walked out of that clinic with a bag of paperwork, a prescription he couldn't fill yet, and a little girl leaning against his side, too tired to ask questions. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed staring at the bottle of over-the-counter syrup they'd been using. Half full, not strong enough. He pulled out his wallet, counted the bills, then again, just to be sure. Still not enough. The next day, he almost didn't show up to class. He had barely slept. The worry felt like a hand around his throat. But he came anyway, not out of discipline, but because if he didn't, it meant giving up, and he couldn't let Lily see that. Ben noticed something was off right away. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Caleb forced a smile. "Yeah, just a long night." But Julia noticed too. She saw him from across the room, hunched over his tablet, eyes distant. When class ended, she waited until most people had gone before walking up beside him. "You sure everything's okay?" He looked at her, debated brushing it off, then stopped. Something about the way she asked made it hard to lie. "It's Lily," he said quietly. "Her asthma's acting up again. I need to get her meds, but I just need a little time to figure it out." Julia nodded slowly, no judgment, no surprise. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small white envelope. He froze. "No," he said instantly, shaking his head. "I can't take that." "It's not charity," she said. "It's what friends do." "I didn't earn it." She met his eyes. "You earned it the second you pulled me out of that car." He stood there, heart pounding, hands clenched at his sides. Pride had kept him standing through so much, but pride didn't stop a child's lungs from tightening at night. He took the envelope, didn't open it until he got home. Inside was a prepaid pharmacy card and a note written in clean, careful handwriting. "Whatever happens, don't stop showing up. The world needs people like you." He stared at those words for a long time, then folded the note and slipped it into the same wallet where he'd kept Julia's number the day they met. The pharmacy visit was quiet. Caleb stood at the counter while the technician scanned the prepaid card, her nails tapping against the keyboard. She didn't ask questions, just nodded, bagged the medicine, and handed it over with a soft, "Hope she feels better soon." He said thank you, and meant it more than most people probably did. That night, Lily slept through for the first time in days. No coughing fits, no midnight pacing, just the sound of her soft breathing and the occasional rustle of her blanket as she rolled over in her sleep. Caleb sat beside her bed for a long while, coffee growing cold in his hands. He didn't even touch it, just watched her, listened, let the knot in his chest finally loosen. He still wasn't used to accepting help. For so long, survival meant keeping your head down and your hand out of reach. But lately, something was shifting, slowly, quietly, like soil thawing after a hard winter. He showed up to class the next morning with new energy. He wasn't just present, he was engaged. When Ben introduced a complicated module on inventory systems, Caleb was the first to finish the sample problem. When a younger guy across the room got stuck, Caleb slid over, walked him through it step by step. "You used to do this kind of thing?" the guy asked. Not exactly, Caleb said, but it's like fixing an engine, one piece at a time. Julia popped in halfway through the session, as she sometimes did. She didn't speak, just stood at the back with her arms crossed, watching. But this time she wasn't watching the room. She was watching Caleb. After class, Ben pulled him aside. "You're picking this up faster than most," he said. "You ever thought about staying on? Not just as a student, but maybe as a mentor?" Caleb blinked. "Me?" "Yeah," Ben said. "You've got the mind for systems and the heart for people. That's rare." Caleb didn't know what to say. For years he had been trying to hold his life together with duct tape and leftover strength. No one had called him a leader, not since high school maybe, and even then it had felt temporary. But the idea stuck with him. That afternoon, after picking Lily up from school, he made dinner. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. And while she coloured at the table, he opened his laptop and read through the next week's training material early. Not because he had to, because he wanted to be ready. At one point, Lily looked up from her drawing. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug?" "Do you think when I grow up I can work where you work?" He smiled, set his pen down. "You can do anything you want." She paused. "Even help people like Miss Julia does?" He nodded, especially that. Later that night he found the note again, the one Julia had written. "Whatever happens, don't stop showing up. The world needs people like you." He read it 3 times, folded it smaller, and tucked it into the side of the bathroom mirror, not hidden, not flaunted, just there, a reminder. Because something had changed. He still didn't have much. The apartment was still old, the fridge still clicked when it ran, the car still made that sound he hadn't figured out yet. But for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door, and Caleb Ross was learning how to turn the handle. It started with a phone call, not one he was expecting. Caleb was walking home from class, backpack over his shoulder, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The screen showed a number he didn't recognise, local area code but no name. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something told him to pick up. "Hello? Caleb Ross?" "Yeah, who's this?" There was a pause. "It's Mark, from Bayview Garage." Caleb stopped walking. He hadn't heard that name in almost a year. Mark had been his manager before the shop shut down. The one who delivered the bad news with a shrug and a box to pack his things. They hadn't spoken since. "I didn't know if this number still worked," Mark continued. I heard you've been doing some training with Lane Tech." Caleb didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure how to feel. "Yeah, I have." "Well," Mark cleared his throat, "I'm reopening the shop. Smaller this time, just 2 bays, but I need someone who knows the work. Thought of you." Caleb's mind raced. He wasn't expecting this, not now. Not when things were finally starting to line up. But the job offer dangled in front of him like an echo of his old life. Steady work, something familiar, something simple. "Look," Mark said, "I know things didn't end great, but you were solid, you always showed up, and I can't afford to train someone from scratch." Caleb glanced toward the corner store across the street, its window fogged from the afternoon chill. He could see Lily's favourite snack on display, the one he used to say no to more often than not. "I'll think about it," he said. "Just don't wait too long," Mark replied. "I need someone by Monday." The call ended. Caleb stood still for a long moment, phone in hand. That night, over dinner, he didn't mention it to Lily. She was too busy talking about a reading contest at school anyway. But when she asked if he would still be home on Friday to watch her perform in the assembly, he said, "Wouldn't miss it," even though the answer suddenly felt complicated. The next day at Lane Tech, Julia noticed something different in him. "You okay?" she asked quietly during break. "Yeah," he lied, "just tired." But Julia had learned to read between his silences. After class, she caught him outside as he was putting his backpack on. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" He looked down at the sidewalk, then back at her. "Got a job offer from my old manager." Her brows lifted slightly. "Is that something you want?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "It's familiar, it's money, but I've come this far. I've got momentum now." "Then why hesitate?" "Because part of me still doesn't trust it," he said. "Like maybe I'm just chasing what's safe instead of what's right." Julia didn't answer immediately. She folded her arms and looked out at the passing cars. "You know," she said softly, "when I first got my promotion, I almost walked away." He looked at her, surprised. "I was scared I didn't belong," she continued. "Scared someone would realise I wasn't good enough, that I'd mess it up." "What changed?" She smiled. "Someone told me if the door opened, maybe I was meant to walk through it." Caleb nodded slowly. That night he wrote 2 lists on a sheet of paper, one for the garage job, one for Lane Tech. He looked at the pros and cons, stared at the page, then tore it up. Because sometimes it wasn't about logic, it was about who you were becoming. The next morning he texted Mark. "Thanks for the offer. I'm going to pass. Got something I'm building here." He didn't get a reply. But he didn't need one. He packed his bag for class, kissed Lily on the forehead, and walked out the door into a future that no longer felt like something happening to him, but something he was finally shaping with his own hands. The announcement came on a Tuesday. It wasn't loud. There was no ceremony. Just a few chairs pushed back, a projector turned off early, and Ben standing at the front of the classroom with a clipboard in his hand. "We've got a few changes coming up," he said casually. "The advanced sessions will need someone to help guide the new group. We're starting to build out peer mentors." Then he looked at Caleb. "And I'd like you to be the first." Caleb blinked. "Me?" Ben nodded. "You're consistent, you're sharp, and you've been helping people around you without being asked. That's what leadership looks like here." There was a quiet moment. Caleb felt a dozen eyes flick toward him. He wasn't used to being at the centre of attention, not for the right reasons. "Yeah," he said after a breath. "Okay, I'd like that." Ben smiled. "Good, you start next week." Later, as the class filtered out, Julia lingered near the back. Caleb packed up slowly, unsure whether to speak first. She did. "I heard the news," she said. "That's a big step." He nodded, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "Kind of feels like I'm pretending." "You're not," she said. "You've earned this." He hesitated, then looked at her. "Why'd you really choose me that day? Not just to help, but everything after. The program, the job lead, showing up like this." Julia leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "You reminded me of someone I used to know." "Who?" "Me." He waited. She took a slow breath. "I didn't grow up with much. My mum cleaned houses, my dad worked maintenance at a middle school. They were good people, but tired. I got a scholarship to college and worked the whole time. There were nights I slept in the library because I couldn't afford rent and textbooks." Caleb looked at her, surprised. "You never talk about that." "I don't need to," she said. "But I remember what it felt like, walking into a room and feeling like you didn't belong. Like everyone else had some guidebook you missed out on." "Yeah," Caleb murmured. "That sounds familiar." Julia smiled softly. "The first person who hired me after college, she didn't even look at my resume. She said she saw something in me that reminded her of herself. I never forgot that." There was a beat of silence between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. "And now you're doing the same," Caleb said quietly. She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just believe in people who don't give up, even when everything tells them to." They walked outside together. The sky was that soft shade of late afternoon blue, not quite evening, not quite done. "Lily's got a recital Friday," Caleb said. "First time she's not terrified to be on stage." Big moment. "Yeah, she's excited." Julia smiled. "Let me know how it goes." He nodded, then paused. "You could come if you want." She looked at him, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said. "You've kind of earned a front row seat." She laughed, not loud but real. "Then I'll bring flowers." And for the first time in a long time, Caleb Ross walked home feeling like the world wasn't just letting him exist, it was making room for him. Friday came with blue skies and a breeze that carried the scent of early spring. Caleb stood in front of the mirror, fixing the collar on his shirt for the third time. It wasn't anything fancy, just clean, pressed, borrowed from a neighbour who was one size smaller. But it looked good enough. Lily stood behind him, dressed in a soft yellow dress with tiny white flowers, fidgeting with her sleeves. "You nervous?" he asked. She nodded, then shook her head, then shrugged. "A little." He smiled. "That's okay. Brave doesn't mean not scared, just means you do it anyway." Lily thought about that, then nodded again, this time with more certainty. They arrived early, the small elementary school cafeteria already buzzing with folding chairs and proud parents holding phones. The stage was no more than a raised platform with a blue curtain and a string of handmade paper stars taped to the edge. It was perfect. Caleb found their seats near the front. He held 2 small bouquets, one for Lily and one for someone else. Julia arrived 10 minutes before the lights dimmed, slipping into the seat beside him with a quiet, "Hey." She wore jeans and a blazer, a soft scarf wrapped around her neck. In her hands was a card and a little box of chocolate turtles. "For the star of the show," she whispered. Caleb grinned. "She's going to love that." The recital began. One by one, kids came up, reciting poems, singing songs, playing tiny instruments with too much enthusiasm and not enough timing. Parents clapped loudly, phones waved in the air. Then it was Lily's turn. She walked up with both hands clasped in front of her, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her dad, and then on Julia beside him. She smiled. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. She read a short poem about sunlight and trees, and how even on cloudy days, the sun is still there. You just can't always see it. And when she finished, the room clapped politely, but Caleb felt something bigger move in his chest. Pride, relief, maybe even peace. Afterward, Lily ran into his arms, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You were amazing," he said, holding her tight. Julia handed her the little box. "You earned this." Lily opened it like it was treasure, eyes wide. "These are my favourite." "I know," Julia smiled. They all walked out together into the golden afternoon. The parking lot shimmered in the sun, and kids ran between cars holding sticky crafts and melting popsicles. Julia turned to Caleb. "You free Monday?" "Yeah, why?" "I want to talk to you about something. We're expanding the program, more communities, more outreach. I need someone to help lead that." He blinked. "Me?" "You've already been doing the work," she said. "I just want to make it official." He didn't answer right away. Lily looked up at him. "Does that mean more kids get help like you helped me?" Caleb smiled down at her. "Yeah, it does." "Then you should do it." Julia watched them, that same softness in her eyes she always had when she wasn't pretending to be the one in charge. "No pressure, just think about it." "I will," Caleb said, but in his heart he already knew. That night, after Lily fell asleep with chocolate on her fingers and a sun-shaped sticker still stuck to her cheek, Caleb sat on the couch with the porch light off. He watched the quiet street, thought about how far they had come, not in miles but in moments. He pulled the folded note from his wallet, the one Julia gave him months ago, and read it again under the dim glow of the kitchen light. "Whatever happens, don't stop showing up. The world needs people like you." He smiled, because now, finally, he believed it too. And in a world full of people rushing past each other, never looking back, never stopping, he had become the kind of man who did. Not because it made headlines, but because it made all the difference. This wasn't a story about luck or grand gestures. It was about a quiet man, a tired father, doing what was right even when no one was watching. And somehow that was enough to change everything. Caleb never asked for attention, never chased recognition. He just showed up for his daughter, for strangers, for himself. And in doing so, he reminded us of something simple, that kindness still matters, that showing up still counts, and that sometimes the good we put into the world finds its way back to us. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, like a porch light that never burns out. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. I'm truly grateful for your time and for letting these quiet moments find a place in your day. If this story touched something in you, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and joining us for more stories like this. From all of us here at Rain Inside, thank you again, and I hope to see you in the next one.